who was Archie Brennan?
Archie Brennan was a completely fascinating and brilliant and interesting character and an amazing tapestry weaver. He started at Dovecot as an apprentice in 1947, and he stopped weaving in 2015. So his tapestry weaving life spans many, many decades and many, many eras of art. At Dovecot, he eventually developed and evolved to become our artistic director in 1964. And in the 60s, he was working with a lot of modernist artists to create tapestries alongside them as interpretations of their work, whether their work is painting or similar. So people like Sutherland and, Robert Motherwell and others. But during that time, he also developed his own artistic voice in tapestry, and he understood the medium to a incredible degree. He knew it inside out and back to front and knew the rules by which you were meant to make tapestry. And then I think spent the next 30, 40 years of his career pulling that apart and undermining his own rules and undermining the traditions of the medium and playing with it as a piece of material culture, I suppose, that he can then adapt and react to his own times. I think it's interesting what you said about tapestry being kind of fairly opposite to our very immediate and quick culture, and the fact that Archie understood that even in the 70s and 80s, when pop culture and quick culture was about TV and about tabloid newspapers and about that kind of media, he reacted to that as a source of visual inspiration, and he wove pictures from the telly. He wove brilliant tapestry that's a giant blow up of a tiny throwaway tabloid newspaper article called "Was It Worth It, Mr. Gutenberg?" And he just had this very pithy, very wry sense of humour about everything that he did. And his tapestries, I think, are brilliant pieces of pop and postmodern art. And I think because he was a tapestry weaver, I think his name is not as well known as it might have been if he was working in a different medium. But I think that's one of the pitfalls of working in something as sort of maybe left field as tapestry weaving has become in the 20th century.
By the way, I've also seen photos of him as a young man, incredibly well built, and I read that he was a bodybuilder and former Mr. Scotland.
He was a former Mr. Scotland. He was good friends with the now late, great Sean Connery back in the day when they were both young lads in Edinburgh. And he actually encouraged Sean Connery into life modelling that eventually got him into modelling and then eventually into acting. So Sean Connery has credited Archie Brennan with the start of his career at various times, which I thought is quite a fascinating little sort of tidbit. But he kind of, he loved sport, and he did a lot of tapestries of sporting personalities, and he himself kept very fit. He was a bodybuilder, but he was also a footballer, and all on an amateur level. But there's some amazing photos of him in the 50s, fully built up, and the sort of Mr. Universe photographs and similar. He was a former Mr. Scotland and entered Mr. Universe in sort of 1953. And he was still very proud of those in his old age. He was like, tiny waist there, good muscles,
He lived a life.
So,
He lived a life.
He lived a life. He definitely did.
So what do you think drew him to tapestry art?
It's a strange thing. I mean, Dovecot always took on apprentices from local schools. At that time in the 50s, it was really like learning a trade. Like you'd go and maybe leave school and become a carpenter. You could also, because there was this tapestry studio in the middle of town, go and become a tapestry weaver as a sort of potential business trade. It wasn't necessarily an artistic thing. But there was a change and a shift in the studios in the 1950s. And there was an encouragement that weavers should at least learn simple draftsmanship. So he went to the art college to do evening classes as well, and eventually he learned things like stained glass and other skills. But eventually his love for tapestry just kind of took off, and he just clicked with it as a way of working. And even though he studied other things, he always came back to studying tapestry, and eventually founded the tapestry course at Edinburgh College of Art. So that was quite key to his development, but also key to the development of Edinburgh as quite a centre for tapestry over the next 20, 30, 40 years through till today.